Good morning, or depending when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I went ahead and made a podcast about the Pokémon trading card game. And you're listening to PTCG Radio. Now, this week, maybe a little bit of a truncated podcast in terms of we're not going through much news or anything like that. Today we are exclusively having a look at Tidal Storm. Last week, and I of course mean 2 weeks ago, we had a look at Gaia Volcano. I took you through all the cards in that set that you needed to know about. Today we do the same thing with Tidal Storm. And essentially, this should hopefully be everything you need to know about the new set. Now remember that when these Japanese sets come out, like X and Y, like Black and White, they often do 2 sets release, and you buy packs of each set separately, but they essentially make up one set. That's what they've done in Japan with Gaia Volcano and Tidal Storm, which is why we looked at Gaia Volcano last week, and we're looking at Tidal Storm this week. And I of course mean 2 weeks ago, not actually last week. Now, when it comes out in the UK, we are actually going to be seeing one set. This will be our February set, I believe, which we should be expecting, in just over a month's time. And it's going to be very exciting when it does come out. We've even had some cards revealed in the UK of them. As a quick side note, Camerupt does have the same wording, so think of it like Magnezone Prime, for those of you that remember, except you're not putting energy into the Lost Zone, you're putting it into the discard pile. You discard 4 fire energy, and Bob's your uncle, you are KOing anything. Well, 5 if you want to get a Mega EX. Having said that, you would essentially be playing Camerupt Emball, and that would essentially function in the same way as Blastoise Black Kyurem, and nobody's playing that at the moment. So yes, Camerupt's getting a lot of hype for its one-hit KO ability, but honestly I don't see it actually being particularly good, because it's largely similar to Blastoise Black Kyurem. I suppose you can run it all on fire energy, but that's about it. Now, what we're going to be doing today is looking at Tidal Storm. It has been a couple of weeks since I was around. My apologies for that. It's been Christmas. I've been in Cornwall with my friends and family. There has been festive merriment to be had. But it's like an old friend coming back and returning to do this podcast. Next week, I'll be going through the 2 regionals that happened recently in the UK. And I'm going to be having a look at Cities results. And I'm going to be having a look at new decks that have come around from Cities. Depressingly, this time next week, I will be back in Lincolnshire, where I live and teach and work and all that rubbish, and I will have plenty of time to knock out a proper podcast. I'll also have a week that I can use to, make sure I've got the most up-to-date information for you guys. So moving on to Tidal Storm. Starting off with grass, we have a Beedrill, and Beedrill is one of these Pokemon that always has quite interesting cards attached to it, but it's rarely particularly good. Now, there was a Beedrill, there were 2 of them from Rising Rivals, and I forget the set. It was something like Secret Wonders. I don't think it was, but it's something around there. And you had the Beedrill that could search Freddy Grass Pokemon, and you had the Beedrill that could do 30 damage times the amount of Beedrill in play. And at the time, Steven Silvestro actually won the World Championship with that Speed Beedrill, or Speedrill deck. And since then, we've had a bunch of borderline playable Beedrills, but in a format where Stage 2s just ain't that good, to be honest with you. This Beedrill has one interesting attack. Now, it is a Stage 2 grass Pokemon, so, I leave you with that. But it's got one attack called Allergy Shock. You do it for a single grass energy. During your next turn, the defending Pokemon that was hit by this attack is knocked out. That is pretty useful. The problem is they can switch, they can retreat, etc. It means if they can't switch or retreat, they are going to be knocked out, but they've got that option available to them, and if they can, you've essentially wasted a turn. They haven't entirely wasted a turn, you force them to use resources, but it's not stunning. Now, you could use this with something like Dragalge and Hypnotoxic Laser to mean that they couldn't retreat out of it, but they could still switch, Escape Rope, use Caldeo's Rush-In attack, ability, etc, etc. There's plenty of ways to get around this. If you come across a deck which is entirely unprepared, it could be quite fun, but I think there's too many ways around it for this to be particularly great and viable. Now, there's 2 Ludicolo in the set. I am, as before, going through the types. We're going through grass at the moment. The other Ludicolo is water, so we'll get there in a minute. This Ludicolo, again, it's a Stage 2. The attack is basically garbage. I mean, for a grass double colourless, it does 80 damage and heals 20 from each of your Pokemon. Stick a Muscle Band, and you one-hit KOing anything that's weak to grass. Most noticeably here, we're going to be talking about Seismitoad. but it's got a grass and a double colourless. It's expensive. What I like, however, is its ability. Captivating Rhythm. Once during your turn, you may flip a coin. If heads, choose one of your opponent's bench Pokemon and switch it with his or her active Pokemon. It is Pokemon Catcher, and now that Pokemon Catcher requires a flip, it is literally exactly Pokemon Catcher, which is useful. It's a kind of Pokemon you're going to want to put on your bench and leave on your bench. Maybe if you're using double colourless energy anyway, then you can put a grass in there, try and use the attack, but it's not probably going to be one that you're attacking with. I mean, heck, if you come across Seismitoad, you're not going to be able to put a muscle band on anyway, because you're going to be trainer locked. So I like Ludicolo, but there's plenty of useful bench Pokemon that we could just stage 2s that we could just put on our bench to help us. None of them see play. The Pyroar with the Catcher ability, without a flip, just by discarding a fire energy, does see a little bit of play, but that's in a dedicated Pyroar deck where it's you're playing 3 of the Pyroar that blocks attacks from basics, and 1 of that Pyroar. I think putting a stage 2 on the bench just for its ability, things like Blastoise and Emboar aren't seeing play at the moment. So, sorry Ludicolo, interesting ability, but I don't think you're going to see a huge amount of play. It's a fun little Masquerain. It's a stage 1. It confuses and then switches to the bench for a grass energy. I kind of like it. You could switch out something like a Snorlax to stop them retreating, or a Pyro if they're a basic, but it's really not going to do a huge amount of good, unfortunately. I want it to be good, but it's just not looking on the cards like it's going to be amazing. Now, there is a Swampert. Well, there's 2 Swampert, actually, but one of them's garbage. The good one is, and we've been talking about these primal traits the last couple of weeks, last few podcasts. And he's got Alpha Growth. Now, it has been a couple of weeks since the last podcast, so I shall remind you about them as we go through. Alpha Growth means you can attach 2 energy cards at a time. Now, Swampert's attack is Hydro Pump, 40 damage, plus 30 more for each water energy attached to Swampert. So if you've already got a water energy attached, you can attach 2 more, and you're doing 130 damage. Or you could just attach a water and a double colourless. Remember, the current translation we have says attaching an energy card, not a basic energy. So you can attach a water and a double colourless, be attacking in a single turn with no energy on at the start of your turn, and you'd be doing 70 damage. Stick a muscle band, and that does the magic 90, which will one-hit KO any Pokemon which is weak to water. And of course this will get through Pyro and stuff even without a muscle band. I like Swampert, partly because as well as its Alpha Growth ability, it's also got the ability Diving Search. Once during your turn, you may search your deck for any one card, shuffle it and put it on top of your deck. Now, it doesn't add perfect consistency because it doesn't go into your hand, but it's still going on top of your deck. That means that unless your opponent ends you or does something else to make you shuffle your deck, you are guaranteed to be able to have something good at the top of your next turn. And this early game consistency is really important in the game as it is. I keep seeing lists with 10 supporters, and I've talked on this podcast time and again how this drives me crazy, especially when I draw a dead and die tournament with 14 supporters and a computer search. But anyway, this early game consistency is incredibly important, and Swampert can really help you with that if you can get him out nice and early. The attack isn't amazing, but when we get to Archie's trump card, or whatever it's called, we'll get to it later. That's when I think Swampert really has the ability to shine. I like the Ancient trait, especially if you're playing a deck with water energy and double colourless, you can get going in a single turn. I love the ability. The attack, it's serviceable. I mean, if you can have a water energy on him and then start piling energy on turn after turn, then that's really useful. So, not bad at all. I suppose I should mention that you need a water energy and a double colourless, in order to be able to use this, but it's still pretty cool. Now, Ludicolo has Alpha Heal. When you recover energy, HP, it recovers twice as much HP. And that's pretty cool, but it's not viable. I'd rather play the other Ludicolo. It doesn't have the awesome 3/4 art. That's where it's full art, but the last kind of quarter of the card is covered with the appropriate colour, water Pokemon being blue, although you can still see the picture behind it. But the attacks just aren't very good. For a colourless energy, you can do Surprise, which allows you to choose a random card from your opponent's hand and they shuffle it into their deck. But it's 30 damage on a stage 2. And we know that stage 2s need to be hitting good, or else you might as well just be using a basic. For a water and a double colourless, it does Splash Dance, 60 damage, does 60 more the next turn. I suppose that's going to get a one-hit KO on any non-Mega EX that isn't water resistant, because you'll do 60 one turn, 120 the next, which adds up to 180, but it's still, I mean, okay, I suppose it will KO Pyroar, but that's for a water and a double colourless. It's just not particularly viable. I don't think it's going to see a huge amount of play, and for that, I can only apologise. Bringing us to our first EX of this podcast, Wailord EX, and I've talked before, I mean, heck, I talked about it, with Beedrill a second ago. They often kind of follow patterns, these Pokemon cards. Unlike Beedrill always has kind of interesting borderline playable cards, Wailord always has a beast of HP, at 200 HP on a Stage 1 a while back. Now, Wailord EX is, of course, a basic Pokemon, as are all EXs. It's got 250 HP. That's amazing. It's not a good card, but it's amazing. It's weak to grass, but even Genesect using Megalocannon with a Muscle Band would only do 240 to him, and it wouldn't get the KO. Ability Water Veil. When you attach an energy from your hand to this Pokemon, remove all special conditions. That's pretty good. I like that, because it gives immunity from stuff like Hypnotoxic Laser, or pretty much immunity. It stops stuff like that, and it's always a useful ability to have. The attack costs 5 water energy, does 120 and puts you to sleep. Now, of course, that doesn't really matter. First of all, you've got a coin flip at the end of your turn and the end of your opponent's turn, which gives you a 75% chance of waking up naturally. And even if you don't, then you're going to be able to wake up by attaching a water energy. But if you've already attached 5 water energy in order to attack, do you really want to attach a 5th water energy to wake up from sleep? The answer, of course, is no. Now, don't get me wrong, this also runs into huge problems with Pokemon like Mewtwo and Yveltal, whose attacks will be fueled by the fact that you have got more energy on you, but it's just too expensive. And there's not really much more to say about Wailord EX. It's too expensive. Now, there is a Whiscash in this particular set. Oh, there's 2 actually. One's got 100 HP and a moderately interesting attack for a colourless energy. Choose one of your opponent Pokemon's attacks. They cannot use it during your next turn, and do 20 damage while you're at it. Useful for stuff like Seismitoad to stop them trainer locking you. For Pokemon that really have that one attack, I mean, attacks like this used to be quite fun when Darkrai was in the format, Darkrai only having the one attack of Night Spear. So, against stuff like Seismitoad, which are only going to be using one attack, it's quite fun. Or maybe against something like a Landorus, which is, only got the energy to, do the first attack. This can be semi-useful, but it's really not going to be amazing. The other Whiscash has got Alpha Growth, which means you can attach 2 energy per turn. It does 40 damage for a water double colourless, doing 1 turn, or 120 damage for 2 water and a colourless, which means you cannot attach enough energy in 1 turn as it is. And it does 20 damage to each of your benched Pokemon. Could be semi-useful if you're using the Outragers on the bench, things like the Kyurem, the Reshiram, the Zekrom. And let's not forget that there's all kinds of things like Mountain Ring, which stop attacks to the bench, or Mr. Mime, etc. So you can block the bench damage if you really want to. It's another one of these cards which it's just too expensive, and I'd love it if it wasn't, but it's too expensive. Speaking of Pokemon that kind of fit into the same role every time, Milotic. Always got an ability, always quite a useful one, usually helps you set up. Shining Ripple. You may use this ability when you play this card from your hand to evolve a Pokemon. Put a card from your discard pile into your hand. So every time you evolve Milotic, you can put a card back into your hand from your discard pile. Now it does say from your hand to evolve a Pokemon, so it's not going to work with that Archie's card we're going to get to in a minute. I kind of like it to add consistency. It can do things like recover special energy, which is incredibly difficult to do under normal circumstances. But the attack isn't particularly good. I mean, it does 60 damage and essentially an escape rope for your Pokemon for a water double colourless. Your opponent switches the active, but they get to choose. The attack isn't good enough, to be honest with you, but I love the ability. If you can find space for it, it recovers supporters. Now, I know VS Seeker does, but it's still quite useful. But I suppose the one thing it really does is it recovers special energy. It recovers anything. And we don't have much that recovers anything. It's why everyone's really bemoaning the lack of Super Rod in the format at the moment, or Night Maintenance as it used to be. It's hard, you can recover energy, or you can recover Pokemon, but it's hard to recover both. It's still a stage 1, it's still an ability, it gets shut off by Garbodor, it's a stage 1. There's all kinds of reasons not to play it, but it's moderately useful. One card which seems to have flown under the radar a little bit, I haven't seen that many people talking about it, is Huntail. Now, it's a stage 1 evolves from Clamperl, if anyone hasn't realised, because it's not a Pokemon that gets a huge amount of press. 100 HP, and it's got an attack, 70 damage, if heads, discard an energy attached to your opponent's Pokemon for a water double colourless. Garbage. But it's got a good attack. Powerful Storm. 1 water energy. 20 damage for each energy attached to all of your Pokemon. Now, I love this guy as a 1-1 tech in any deck that plays a water energy. Because I've been playing an awful lot of Seismitoad this format. I haven't been testing as much as I'd like. I haven't been playing as much as I'd like. And as I've tweeted out recently, my World's Invite is, it's in jeopardy due to the fact that I've only got, I think, 3 more regionals and 4 cities. And that's basically it for decent tournaments this year, outside of nationals. But I've been playing a bit of Seismitoad when I have been playing. And the reason I use Seismitoad as an example is this isn't a deck where you're kind of chucking down energy every turn. But one of the plays I love to make with Seismitoad is I love to kind of have a Seismitoad active using Quaking Punch. Now, that's not particularly, unusual. But then I like to build up other Seismitoad on my bench to use Grenade Hammer. Grenade Hammer is a massively underrated attack. Muscle Band, Laser, Verbank, 180 damage, thank you very much. And that's how I like to close out games. I like to basically stall for long enough to Quaking Hammer my way to a win. And I end up, and it does say energy. Now, this is a Japanese translation. We don't have the English translation yet. They're usually accurate, but they do occasionally change, so do bear that in mind. It's energy, not energy card. So double colourless energy is going to count twice. So that basically allows me to, if I've got, let's say 2 Seismitoad with free energy on each, and then I've got a Seismitoad active with a double colourless, I'd say energy. That's 160 damage. You put the energy on Huntail, boom, 180 damage. Now that is 9 energy, but there are an awful lot of decks that play 9 energy, and there are an awful lot of decks which get 9 energy on the board by the end of the game. So, don't look past this card. It's a really quite nice card. Now, if it was colourless energy, I'd almost consider it as a 1-1 tech in every deck for the near future, just to see if I can get a bit of play out of it. In reality, it's going to be limited to decks that play water energy. But I think any deck that plays water energy should seriously be considering this as a 1-1 tech. And I've spent more time on this than a lot of cards today for the reason that I haven't seen many people talking about it, and I think that's potentially a mistake. Now, there is a Gorbis who's got a primal trait, Alpha Growth, which means you can attach 2 energy cards, and it's got an attack for a water and a colourless, meaning you can get it going in 1 turn. 30 damage if heads your opponent is paralysed. And it's called Confusion. And it doesn't confuse, it paralyses them. That annoys me. In reality, guys, the attack's underpowered. Now, Kyogre EX, I will try and do a little bit quicker. Because we've talked about him a couple times before. The regular EX, 30 damage for a water and a colourless, your opponent's Pokemon is now asleep. Meh. 2 water, do colourless for 140, and return 2 water energy to your hand. Kind of useful, especially with Primal Kyogre EX's Alpha Growth Primal trait. That was a mouthful. And then, of course, you can put Muscle Band, Laser, Verbank to take that up to 190. Or just Muscle Band Laser to get it up to 170. Kind of useful, bit overpriced. You're not going to get that much energy on it without Blastoise in play. And whenever you're piling, 4 water energy onto a water Pokemon, use Caldeo. It's got the same, well, it's actually got 10 less. It's got the same HP? It's got the same or 10 less HP. I think it's 170 Caldeo. And it's got the same weakness, but it's, it's doing 170 time you get 4 water energy on it. But Primal Kyogre EX is where we get some fun. And remember this for the Archie card in a minute. It's got the Alpha Growth, which allows you to attach 2 energy cards, 240 HP, weakness to Grass, so Virizion Genesect, it's never going away, that deck, let's just be honest, until it gets rotated. They even released a whole set of Fire, and that didn't kill it, although none of those were that good. Anyway, I digress. Water, 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 colourless. 150 damage. Move 2 energy from this Pokemon to one of your bench Pokemon, and it does 30 damage to each benched Pokemon EX. That's amazing! 150 damage with a Muscle Band goes to 170. Although we know Pokemon is obsessed with 120 and 150. They're the two damage amounts it really loves. So it's doing 150 damage and 30 to each EX, and it moves 2 energy to the bench. Now that might not seem particularly great, but think about, I suppose, a non-EX Tornadus, the regular Tornadus, which was actually reprinted, I believe, in Legendary Treasures. Could be wrong about that, but it's been reprinted, it's still in the format. But it came out in Emerging Powers, it saw a lot of play, especially in CMT quite early, Celebi, Mewtwo, Tornadus. And what was really good about that is it did 80 damage and it moved an energy to the bench. It meant your opponent wasn't going to knock all your energy off the board if they knocked it out. Now, not only does this do the same thing, but it allows you to attach 2 energy the following turn using its primal trait. I really like this card. I think it's expensive. I think you're going to have to find a way to work it. There is, as I predicted, a Spirit Link for this primal Kyogre in the set, so you don't have to lose your turn to evolve it. Although, you will obviously not then be able to put a Muscle Band on it, unless you play Tool Retriever as well. But if you can get it going essentially in 2 turns, using the Alpha Growth ability. And that attack is brutal. You are going to see people play this, you're going to see it do good attacks. The last Pokemon we've got is the perennial support Pokemon Manaphy. 2 attacks, 1 water energy each on a basic with 70 HP. Shuffle your hand into your deck, draw 6 cards, lovely setting up attack. Life save, choose 2 water Pokemon from your discard pile and put them into your hand. It's got a retreat cost of 2, which really hurts it as a setup Pokemon, but it's kind of cool nonetheless. There's a Lantern, moving into Lightning, 100 HP for a water and a colourless, 40 damage, flip a coin, if heads prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by opponent's attacks during your opponent's next turn. Kind of cool. 100 HP, stage 1, 2 energy, only does 40 damage. It's not powerful enough. Now, Tynamos had the spotlight for a long time, but Tynamos never had the spotlight. That was a faux pas. Electric has had the spotlight for a long time, and we've got a new one. It's garbage, but it's a free quarter art, so we'll talk about it. It's got Alpha Heal, so when you recover HP, it recovers twice as much. Lightning, double colourless, 50 damage. Flip a coin. If heads, it does 70. If tails, it does 50 to them, 20 to you. Not good. But Electros, or sometimes seen as a tech in, there were a couple of Electros that occasionally saw play in these electric decks back in the day when electric was amazing. That was the electric, which is like the Bronzong now. Stage 2, it's got a garbage attack. 2 lightning, 2 colourless, 80 damage. If you discard all lightning attached to it, it goes up to 130, which is still not enough. Zekrom is a basic that for free lightning energy does 120. It does 40 to you, admittedly, but it does almost as much damage on a basic for 1 less energy, and you don't have to discard. But it's got an ability Energy Connect, and this goes into my Ludicolo discussion, I suppose, which is essentially, it's a really good Pokemon to have on your bench to use the ability, but bear in mind that those Pokemon are not seeing much play. Choose 1 basic energy attached to your bench Pokemon and move it to your active Pokemon. This ability can be used any number of times during your turn. It means you can just put the energy wherever you like early game. It means if you don't have the Pokemon you want early, you can just put the energy down and move it to when they get active. What it really means is you can essentially put any Pokemon down, switch your retreat into it, and then move the energy you want up to it. It's kind of like, well, it is Scramble Switch, essentially, except it doesn't move special energy, and it doesn't switch the active. But so I suppose it's actually not that much like Scramble Switch. But you know what I'm saying here? It fulfills a similar kind of role, and I like that. I don't think it's going to see a huge amount of play, because it's a stage 2 that you're having to stick on your bench. It's also got a retreat cost of 3. As you're thinking about it, Dusknoir is a stage 2 that goes on the bench to see some play. But I think Dusknoir's ability is exceptionally phenomenal, and even then it sees play in kind of rogue decks only. I did tell you I was going to talk about every Pokemon with an ancient trait. Tentacle's got Alpha Heal, recover twice as much HP. It's a Psychic, it does 20 damage for a Psychic and a colourless. It's garbage. There's a Psychic Starmie. It's not any good, but I don't think we've seen a Psychic Starmie before, so, that's kind of cool. Sharpedo EX, another one we've talked about before. It's got a weakness to lightning, not fighting, which does help. But it doesn't have a resistance to fighting, and Yveltal EX does. It's got 2 attacks for a dark and a colourless. Switch your opponent's active Pokemon with one of his or her bench Pokemon. This attack does 30 to the new active Pokemon. Kind of cool, especially against decks like Metal, where they're going to have, say, a Bronzong on the bench with a high retreat cost, but they can just switch out of it. And for 2 dark and a colourless, 100 damage, discard an energy attached to this Pokemon and your opponent's active Pokemon. It's quite interesting in that you can knock a double colourless off a Seismitoad while half KOing it, but let's be honest, ladies and gentlemen, neither of those attacks are as good as Yveltal's 2 attacks. And it's a dark Pokemon. And it doesn't use double colourless for the second attack. It's just not as good as Yveltal. There's a Crawdaunt we've talked about before. Rubbish attack, but it's got an ability. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may discard an energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. I can see this seeing a little bit of play. It's pretty cool. Essentially, all you need to do is just, you put 3 of these on your bench, 3 Corphish on your bench, and then as soon as you get Crawdaunt, you're just discarding energy from your opponent's active. Really quite cool, but are you going to have room in your deck for a free Stage 1 line that you're only putting in order to use the ability? Also got a retreat cost of 2, which is far from ideal. Moving into Fairy, there's an Azumarill who does 30 damage for a double colourless and paralyzes on a coin flip. It's a stage 1, remember. It's not particularly great, but if you're having trouble with maybe having even a Dragonite deck, which would be weak to Fairy, it's still not particularly good because they can just use a second Dragonite's ability to get out of the paralysis. It's not particularly good. Azumarill. The second one is 3/4 art. It's got Alpha Heal, so it recovers twice as much HP. Tail Slap, 30 damage for a double colourless energy, times the amount of heads you can flip from 2 coins. Flip 2 coins, 30 times the number of heads. Now it has got a second attack for a Fairy and a double colourless. 100 damage, minus 10 for each damage counter on Azumarill. If you really want to hit for Fairy weakness, Azumarill can do it. Stage 1, 2 energy, double colourless, and a Fairy, but it's not particularly good. Gardevoir EX, again, we've talked about before. It's got a Spirit Link. Which means you don't have to end your turn to Mega Evolve if you've got the Spirit Link attached to Gardevoir EX. Regular Gardevoir, it's a Fairy Pokemon. For 1 Fairy energy, 20 damage. Heal damage done equal to the damage you do. I.e., if I put a Muscle Band on and do 40, I'm healing 40. For 3 Fairy energy, 100 damage, has no weakness during your opponent's next turn. Now, it's got a weakness to Metal, so the only time this is really going to be an issue is that, Bronzong Metal dedicated deck. Kind of useful, I suppose, but it's got 170 HP. So Dialga with 4 energy and a Muscle Band can one-hit KO it without the weakness, so it's kind of irrelevant. That's not particularly good. What is pretty darn good is Mega Gardevoir EX. Mega Gardevoir EX has 210 HP, and it's got 1 attack. For a Fairy and a double colourless, Brilliant Arrow, 30 damage for each Fairy energy attached to your Pokemon. Now, of course, what you want to be doing here is using the regular Xerneas to put loads of Fairy energy on the field as soon as you can, and then using Mega Gardevoir EX, you only need 6 Fairy energy on the bench. On all of your Pokemon. And it's attached to your Pokemon. So you have 3 on Mega Gardevoir, and then 3 anywhere else. Not only are you doing 180, but if they KO you, they're not actually knocking all your energy off the field. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is particularly important. Now, there are a couple of Kingdra. I suppose the first one's got an interesting attack. 130 HP, Dragon, both of them. The first one's got a nice attack for a Water and a Lightning. 70 damage, flip 2 coins. For each head, choose 1 energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon and discard it. That's awesome. If both coins are tails, this attack fails. Now, if you put a Fliptini on the bench, the one with the ability that allows you to reflip coin to use for attacks, then that only gives you something like a 6.5% chance of or 7.5% chance, something like that, of failing that. A very low chance, but it's going to happen occasionally. So, no, it's not. It's a 12.5%. I don't know. My maths is escaping me. It's New Year's Eve and I'm recording you guys a wonderful podcast. You'll have to let me off the maths. I think it's maybe a 1 in 8, 1 in 16. Point is 6.25. Let's go for that. And if I'm wrong, tweet me at the Wassy or email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. Anyway, the point is this. There's a lot of cards in this set which discard energy. What I really like about this is you can do 70 damage, 90 with a muscle band, which we love because 90 means that you're KOing any X with weakness, and that's kind of key in this format. But it's water and it's lightning, and you've got that chance of it failing, and it's just... It's the way it is, to be honest. It's not great. The other Kingdra's got Alpha Growth. You can attach 2 energy cards per turn. And firstly, Gather Strength. Colourless energy. Search your deck for 4 basic energy cards, reveal them, put them into your hand. That's pretty cool. For 2 water, because not only does that get you energy cards to use in the following turns, but it means if you want to, it gives you less chance of drawing an energy card next turn, because there's 4 less in your deck, and it gives you a greater chance of drawing something that isn't an energy card, like a supporter or a rare candy or a Pokémon that you want. So, I like that, because it thins your deck. Not only that, but it's got a second attack for 2 water and a lightning, 150 damage, choose 1 water and 1 lightning, and discard them. Now, here's what's attached, obviously, to Kingdra. Here's what's cool about this Pokemon. Now again, Pokemon's fetish with 150 damage is coming to the fore. But what's really cool about this, you put a Muscle Band, it's doing 150. It's a non-EX, you put a Silver Bangle, it does 180. That's awesome. And there's obviously synergy with its primal ability here. Not primal ability, primal trait. Does 150 damage for free energy, you discard 2, and then you use something like Energy Retrieval or Superior Energy Retrieval. You get them back in your hand the following turn, and you get to attach both of them to attack again. And one of the things that I've been noticing with this format is these high HP non-EXs can be pretty hard to KO. Now, it's weak to Fairy. Outside of Fairy Box, there ain't that many Fairy decks around nowadays, ladies and gentlemen. And not only that, but... it's 130, Donphan really struggles to hit 130 damage when it's not hitting for weakness. A lot of these are why the Outragers have been pretty good recently. It can be hard to hit these figures if you're not hitting for weakness, so I kind of like that. It's pretty cool. Whether it's going to see any play as a Stage 2 that needs free energy to attack, you still need an energy on there before you use Alpha Growth, and then you still need the 2 energy to use Alpha Growth. Far from perfect, but it's there. Sticking with our theme, I suppose, in today's podcast of Pokemon that repeat, Delcatty always has stuff to do with energy. It's a Stage 1, 80 HP, colourless. For 1 colourless energy, move as many energy cards attached to your Pokemon to your other Pokemon in any way that you like. You're not going to be using that till at least turn 2. Nobody's going to be wasting an attack on a weak Stage 1, which is almost certainly going to get KO because it's weak to fighting and has 80 HP, just to do that. Sorry about that. Now, there is a beautiful, beautiful Bidoof. And if you haven't seen it, then search, Google yourself Bidoof Tidal Storm, or go and look it up on pokebeach.com, which is where I go and look at a lot of these cards. I need to give them props occasionally, because I do use their resources. I use their pictures, my YouTube videos, with their permission, I should add, as well. So it's nice giving them a bit of props here and there. Go over and see that Bidoof. The art is beautiful. It's got Alpha Heal, recover twice as much HP, but it does 20 damage for a double colourless, or 40 if it's got any water attached, which means you'll need to attach 2 energy to do 40 damage on a 70 HP basic. It ain't much good, but it's kind of awesome art. And that's really it for the Pokemon in this set, unless you're excited by 120 HP Stage 1 Bibarel, which allows you to do 80 damage times the number of heads you can hit in a row, 80 damage times the number of heads until you flip tails, for free energy. Yes, if you flip tails it does nothing, but if you can hit 2 heads of a Muscle Band, 180. There's a 25% chance of that happening, and that one is right. I would just like to pause very, very quickly here to just I suppose answer an email on the podcast, before we get to the trainers, from Jack Brandt, a lovely chap who sent me a couple of emails recently. Firstly, hello to that chap who emailed me to tell me that he likes the podcast, and people quite like it when I give him a shout out when they email me, so hello Jack. He's asked me a nice little question. Is there a reason why a disorganised discard pile is not allowed? He basically says he was given a warning for having a disorganised discard pile at a tournament. Now, I don't have the rulebook in front of me, so I cannot quote you what it says, but essentially, yes, the judge can give you a warning for that. And the reason very simply is, the judge needs to be able to see what's going on, and your opponent needs to be able to see what's going on. If your discard pile, and I obviously wasn't there to see your discard pile, so I may be, getting the wrong end of the stick from what you said in your email, but essentially, I've seen discard piles before where they're kind of falling over and touching my opponent's bench, or they're getting, almost mixed up with my opponent's deck, or it's so messy that I can't easily see how many special energies in the discard pile when I'm playing Driftblim or something like that. They're not expecting, a perfectly organised discard pile, but a messy discard pile can make it hard to fully make out your side of the board, see how many bench Pokemon you've got, see if something's in a discard pile or on the bench, things like that. So that's the reason judges do that, and I have seen that happen at other tournaments. Although I think being given a warning is kind of harsh, unless they've already told you several times. So, hello to Jack. Please keep listening. There's your answer. Yay, now I don't have to write an email. I might anyway, just to be nice. But I don't have to, and that's the key. Moving into trainers. We have a reprint of Escape Rope. Kind of cool, I suppose. Why not? That's if anyone's forgotten, it's a trainer which is basically a switch for you and an enforced switch for your opponent. It's kind of cool, especially against stuff like Donphan. If they've only got one Robo Substitute out, you play Escape Rope and they have to not have their Robo Substitute active. Freshwater Set. It's like a potion, but it does 20 instead of 30, and it heals 20 damage from all of your Pokemon. If you're playing a deck which likes healing, I can see that being pretty cool. Dive Ball. Search your deck for a water Pokemon and put it into your hand. To put this into perspective, Master Ball allows you to search for any Pokemon, and it's an ace spec. We have been struggling for Pokemon search for some time in this format. We've got Ultra Ball, but you've got to discard 2. We've had Level and Ultra Ball, but they, only 90 HP or less, only free retreat cost or higher. We've had Plasma Ball, which search for Plasma Pokemon, etc. If you're playing an all-water deck, this card is amazing. A Seismitoad deck, this card is amazing. I love Dive Ball, it's brilliant. And Water's getting a lot of love, as we'll see. EXP Share is being reprinted. We lost this when Dragon Ball got rotated. It's coming back. And I had a question from somebody. It was on my Twitter. It was a little while ago now, so I do apologise. I can't tell you who that was. I got a really good question from somebody asking me, is Tool Drop going to become better now that EXP Share is in the format? And the answer is no. The reason why Tool Drop was good with EXP Share was that the Trubbish with Tool Drop takes 2 energy to attack. You cannot put 2 energy down in one turn with that Trubbish, so you had to have EXP Share to keep an energy. Essentially, you attack with a Trubbish with 2 energy, and you got a Trubbish with an EXP Share on your bench. That means that when your active Trubbish gets knocked out from damage, that basic Psychic gets put onto your bench Trubbish, and then you get to recycle energy. And that's what it does. It puts us only basic, a basic energy from the Pokemon that was just knocked out by damage, not by a special condition, and allows you to pop it to the one on the bench that's got EXP Share on it. But the thing is, we've got Dimension Valley, which allows Tool Drop Trubbish to attack for one turn, meaning they don't use EXP Share, and they would rather use other tools like Muscle Band, Silver Bangle, or Silver Mirror to block Plasma, or things a lot of that nature. That's what you're really going to want to be using. So EXP Share, I don't think is going to see much play, especially with Startling Megaphone all over the format. But it's kind of cool. Both Kyogre and Gardevoir get Spirit Links, and they should, to be honest. It's as I predicted. From now on, any Mega EXs, Primal EXs which come out in the future, we can expect to see get these Spirit Links. But we're not going to get retrospective ones for Pokemon that have already been out a while, and Pokemon like Metagross, which are being released, and Diancie, which are being released kind of only in these promotional packs. We cannot expect to see these Spirit Link cards. Spirit Links, just as a quick reminder, allow you to Mega your EX without having to end your turn. They're pretty cool, but they're just not really going to be used for anything else. And I think Pokemon have laid down, quite carefully and quite clearly their stance with these Spirit Link cards. If it's a Mega EX which is released as part of a normal set, you are going to be having a Spirit Link. In any other circumstance, you're not. So, that's what Pokemon are doing. Essentially, you can like it or lump it. Now, the card which is really intriguing me, Archie's Trump card. Put a water Pokemon from your discard pile onto your bench, then draw 5 cards, but you can only play this card if it's the only one in your hand. First thing I'm going to say about this, and I probably said this on the previous podcast, how often do you empty your hand and just leave a Juniper for next turn? I have done that many, many times. And now this is not, we have not received an official ruling yet. The thing with rulings has always been that official rulings are not given out until the set cards are released in English. So we're not going to get an official ruling on this for a while. But the way it's translated, there is a note about this on PokeBeach.com to say that it, as far as they're concerned, it is translated correctly. It is any water Pokemon, not just a basic. Think Blastoise. You discard a Blastoise, play Archie's Trump card. As an interesting little note, I did see somebody post somewhere online that Lysandra's last resort was called Lysandra's Trump card in Japanese. So does this mean that it's going to be Archie's last resort in the UK? Quite possibly. Anyway, that's a bit of a by-the-by. But think about Blastoise. You get a Blastoise in your discard pile, play this card, you got a Blastoise on your bench whenever. But I see this, and this is purely, we're not going to see until people start using these cards. But I see this, and I would point you back to my previous podcast where I discussed, Maxie's Trump card or last resort, whatever it's called. In the same way I'm going to be having a look at this one. So a lot of my thoughts from last podcast will carry over here. But essentially, I see this not as a, you need it. So, for instance, I don't think this is going to resurrect Blastoise and you're just going to use Blastoise here. I don't think you're going to be able to rely on getting a Blastoise in your discard pile and then having this card as the only card in your hand. I think that is less likely than just having a rare candy Blastoise in your hand while you've got a Squirtle on the bench. But I think this is going to be really, really useful for tech Pokemon. So, let's say something along the lines of, I don't know, that Swampert. The attack's kind of cool. The ancient trait's kind of cool. The ability is really cool. I can just, if I'm playing a water deck, I'm probably going to want to put, one Archie's Trump card in my deck, just because it's an amazing card. I put 1 or 2 Swampert in my deck, and, discard them as and when I get them, with Ultra Ball, if I'm not using an all-water deck and just using Dive Ball, and I'm not going to probably use them every game, but there's going to be some games where I get 1 or 2 of these on my bench, and it's going to be amazingly helpful. Now, I'm not going to pretend here to go through every useful water Pokemon you can use with this. I may well do that in a future podcast if we've got a week where there's nothing really going on. I may well do a podcast where I look at Maxie's and Archie's Trump cards, and I tell you what I consider to be the best cards to use along with them. But what I think is worth pointing out for the time being is that this is a card with massive potential, but not a card which is just going to instantly be amazing. All these people that have been dismissing it because it's got to be the only card in your hand, blah blah blah, I think they're silly. Professor Birch's observation is another supporter. Shuffle your hand into your deck, flip a coin. If heads, draw 7, if tails, draw 4. I mean, I suppose statistically it's better than Shauna because you're going to be getting an average of 5.5 cards. If your flips are anything like mine, just play Shauna. 2 more to go, both stadiums. Undulating Ocean. Just in case water wasn't given enough help with Archie's Trump card and Dive Ball, Undulating Ocean. Once during each player's turn, he or she may heal 30 damage from each of his or her water and lightning Pokemon. That's absurd! Imagine having a Seismitoad active that can heal 30 damage from itself every turn. That's crazy! Now, some people have said, just put it up there with a hard charm, and you're sorted. You're essentially, doing 30 damage less every turn. Yeah, but then you're only doing 30 damage because there's no muscle band, no laser, no Verbank. Or I suppose you can have laser but no Verbank. So something to bear in mind. Seismitoad only does 30, and part of what makes Seismitoad good is having the muscle band, laser, Verbank. I know the one time I played Seismitoad this format at Manchester Regionals, I went free drop, and my biggest problem was damage output. And it's because I played Crushing Hammer over, a full complement of laser in Verbank City Gym, and that was a huge mistake because I was never really doing kind of essentially 110 damage. That's 50 with a muscle band, 30 at the end of my turn through poison with Verbank out, 30 at the end of their turn. So I'm not. You can consistently 2-hit KO with Seismitoad if you've got the Verbank laser. If you haven't got the Verbank laser, it's much worse. And that's the only reason I see people not playing Undulating Ocean for Seismitoad. In any non-Seismitoad water deck, this is no problem. You've got to play it. But what I want to point out here, we've already got a format full of really useful stadiums. Think Verbank City Gym, think Dimension Valley. Now we've got Undulating Ocean. We've also got Silent Lab, which is a stadium which basically turns off all abilities. It's Garbodor in a stadium, which is just crazy. That's incredibly good. If we have a quick look back at Gaia Volcano, we've got Scorching Earth, which allows you to discard a fire or fighting energy and draw 2 cards, which is going to be amazing for something like a Landorus-based deck, the one where you get to attach a fighting energy from your discard, or a fire-based deck with Blacksmith. We've got Memory Shrine, which allows you to use attacks from your pre-evolutions of all of your Pokémon. There's just so many good stadiums here that I see Stadium Walls becoming a much bigger part of the format. Now, they've been becoming a bigger part of the format. I think this is only going to increase. And finally, Wonder Energy. This card can only be attached to it's a special fairy energy, just so we're clear. Prevent all effects, excluding damage, from your opponent's attacks done to this Pokemon. I.e., no special conditions, Beedrill's attack wouldn't get the KO here, etc, etc. I don't think it's amazing. And to be honest, I probably wouldn't play this, because the fairy decks which are viable are the ones which revolve around Aromatiss's ability moving energy around, and what you don't want to be doing is playing special energy which are vulnerable to Enhanced Hammer. If I was going to play a fairy deck when this comes out, and to be honest, there's a very good chance I am going to be playing a fairy deck, although we also love the idea of Landorus Groudon, so we're going to have to see. I'm going to be playing Mega Gardevoir, just trying to get fairy energy on the field. What I don't want to be doing is essentially just putting down a fairy energy which my opponent's going to be able to Enhanced Hammer away, making it harder to attack and taking 30 damage away from my Mega Gardevoir. So, there we go, ladies and gentlemen. That is what I have to tell you about Tidal Storm and Gaia Volcano. I've gone through every card which I think you should be aware of. If I've missed any, or you think I've got anything to add, please do get in touch with me. You can tweet me at TheWassy, or you can email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, or if you're listening on SoundCloud, YouTube, etc., just post a comment down below. Now, I know my YouTube channel has been a little bit barren the last couple of weeks. It's been a combination of, firstly, Christmas, and secondly, my technical problems have reared their ugly heads again. I assure you my YouTube channel is not dead, and it will be coming back. There will be plenty of deck breakdowns and games and top 10 lists and all that good stuff coming up in the near future, so do keep subscribing, do keep on the ball with that. I assure you, it's been a bit quiet because it's kind of had to have been for the couple of weeks. It's coming back. Now, next week I'll be back looking at the format as it stands at the moment. I've got a couple of UK regionals to tell you about, and I'm going to see what information I can find about cities to tell you, and there are some very interesting new decks which I think you lovely people need to be told about. But that's all for next week. Until then, I hope you had a lovely, lovely Christmas. Feel free to tweet me out the Wassy and show me what Pokemon presents you got. That could be quite fun. I always like seeing cool stuff like that. And email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. Make sure you have a lovely new year. Hopefully you're listening to this on New Year's Eve and it's not too late. Look after yourselves. Don't do anything too silly, although I suppose I'm not really one to talk with that. And have a lovely new year. I'm looking forward to another year of Pokémon, to be honest, and PTCG Radio, and very thankful to all the people that are going to listen over the next year. Was that a bit soppy? Yes, it probably was. Look after yourselves. I shall see you next year. I'm sorry I had to.